Well, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us at our 2023 DC Intern Summit. My name is Janae Mitchell. I attend Clemson University, and I have the honor of being one of the 2023 summer interns here at the Clare Boothe Luce Center for Conservative Women. The Luce Center provides a conservative woman's perspective and expertise on issues that affect our lives, country, and faith. One such distinguished woman is our first speaker. So I have the pleasure of introducing Mrs. Rachel Cauley. Rachel will be sharing with us practical applications on how to become a better conservative communicator. She will be equipping us with tools on how we can improve our communication skills as conservative women. Rachel's extensive experience working for grassroots organizations, political campaigns, and the conservative movement spans over 15 years. She has overseen press strategy, media relations, and issue advocacy for campaigns, nonprofits, members of Congress, and the White House. Rachel recently served as the Communications Director at the White House Office of Management and Budget under Director Ross Vought, managing the daily operations of the entire communications team. Rachel led the Office of Management and Budget Strategy and execution on some of President Trump's highest profile policies. Rachel started her career working in the U.S. House for then House Republican Conference Chair Mike Pence. She also served as Communications Director to two primary challengers in the 2014 election cycle, Matt Bevin for U.S. Senate and Dave Brat for U.S. Congress. She was a vital team member responsible for launching Conservative Review, CRTV, and the Mark Levin TV show, Now The Blaze, one of the fastest growing conservative alternative news outlets, where she was a spokeswoman. Prior to working at the White House, Rachel did media relations and TV training for District Media Group. Rachel Cauley is currently the Communications Director at the Center for Renewing America, an organization dedicated to fighting the culture war. Their mission is to renew a consensus of America as a nation under God where freedom is protected through just laws and healthy communities. She also does media training in DC, helping members of Congress and conservatives be more effective communicators. Rachel is an Indiana native and a graduate of Purdue University. And most excitingly, in May, Miss Rachel married Thomas Cauley. They both live in the DC area, enjoy running, gardening, and playing sports. So please join me in warmly welcoming Mrs. Rachel Cauley.
Thank you. Very fun. Very sweet of you. It is very weird getting used to my new last name, but it's very exciting. Well, I am very glad to be your kickoff speaker. You know, you have a very exciting day planned, and I love speaking to you all because it's not, even though I sound and probably look old. I've been in DC for a long time. I remember very vividly when I was in your shoes and I was an intern in Washington. Actually, I interned twice when I was in college. I was a pharmacy major and I didn't really know much about politics, but I knew that I had a strong opinion and I wanted to get paid for it. And I didn't like my physics classes. So I got an internship in Washington my junior year and then interned again in my senior year. And I got what they call Potomac fever, where I knew I had to come back and I didn't know how or why. I just needed to be back here. And so I ultimately got a job in communications. I also ended up quickly getting a comms degree as well. And fast forward to where I am now, the last decade plus, I've been doing communications really for movement conservatives in all different areas, the White House and campaigns on the Hill. And so what I'm going to do today is, and I don't know, Chris, can you guys see my presentation? Oh, there. Can you guys see that? No. What I'm going to do today is, oh, there we go. Maybe it's just when it sleeps, is go through just a couple quick, how do you communicate better as a conservative? How do you what are some things that you guys can be practicing now for when you do come back to DC? What are some ways that you guys can not only prep and sound and articulate better as a conservative, because that's what I do and it's also what I help people do, but also how do I know if I want a job in DC and how would I get a job in communications if I do want one? Because I know some people are interested in comms, they just don't know what form that takes. I certainly didn't know what that form took until I really moved out here and just figured my way through. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and take questions at the end. I want to make sure we leave enough time for that. But let's go ahead and get started But before, I do want to say, a lot of you guys are wearing pink. I'm not going to watch the Barbie movie because it's woke and I don't give money to people that hate me. That was my New Year's resolution, and I think Hollywood hates me. So, all that to say, no judgment for those who are watching it. But any movie that normalizes wearing hot pink or purple, I just feel like we should embrace it. So I made a special non-woke Barbie presentation today where it's all pink and purple. So this is why I got a little glow up on my PowerPoint. So with that said, one of the things that I do, and I know they mentioned it when they were introducing me, is in addition to my day job where I work at the Center for Renewing America, I also work with members of Congress, senators, movement folks, people that want to go on TV, people that want to speak in front of groups of people, and they want to do it better and they want to be sharper. And so what I'm going to do today is give you my top 4, 5, 6 tips that I give to them, that I'll give to you guys, and hopefully that will put you well ahead of when a 56-year-old congressman who's just learning this for the first time, so that when you come to Washington, you'll be able to have your speaking skills pretty polished, okay? So let's start on delivery. Delivery is something that I'll start on before content, but I'm gonna hopefully play a couple videos for you guys along the way, so hopefully you can see what I'm trying to say. The first thing I tell people is when you are a conservative woman, you usually have a little bit higher of a bar to accomplish when you're communicating with somebody. I'm not saying this as a radical feminist. I'm just saying a lot of us work in a pretty male-dominated world. I was the only female when I launched a media company. I was the only female in 2 campaigns that I worked, and I was very proud of it. However, I did feel like if I did not communicate in the way that some of the men did, I wasn't going to be seen as smart or as intelligent. And so even more so, we as conservatives have that against us when the left is trying to just throw anything at us. And so one thing I like to tell young people is, and I like to use the biblical analogy of when Joseph was storing up 7 years of harvest for the 7 years of famine he had down the road. You guys want to be in DC someday, or maybe you want to work in politics, or maybe you want to work for the conservative movement. Well, right now, while you're in school, while you don't have an exciting new job that you really want someday, start practicing now, storing up really good habits. Filler words are honestly one of the big things that you can work on now. And I always recommend this app to everyone. I have it myself, but if you're a young woman that wants to get better at communicating, the likes, ums, you knows are going to be really important to weed out. So this app is awesome. You have a free version. I use that free version. Download that and have it, practice it, and see how quickly you talk. Use that to weed out filler words. That will really eliminate distraction. The second tip for delivery is uptalk. Now, I know probably some of you guys know what I'm talking about, but it is so pervasive in really the TikTok folks of today, or the Instagram influencers of today. It's almost hard to recognize. So let me go ahead and quickly play a video for you before I tell you about it, just so you know what I'm talking about, okay?
My day at culinary school in New York. I walked to class and I set up my station, and today was egg day, so you can see we had so many eggs.
All right, you guys probably know what I'm talking about, but it's that, today I went to culinary school and we're working on eggs, and whatever ends up sounding like you're asking a question, every single phrase is something that older professionals in DC, specifically men, do not like, and it is annoying if you are hoping to be on TV someday, if you are hoping to speak in front of people someday. So that is something you very much, women in particular, struggle with it. I know I probably do on occasion too, but making sure that you know that you do it and eliminating that is very, very important. All right, let's keep going. You would be surprised how many people, when I'm interviewing them, or how many people, when interviewing them to work for me or interviewing them to go on camera, do not look at me in the eye. And I know that that's something that's a little bit harder these days because we're just not, I don't know if it's an attention span thing. Sometimes I am always thinking about something, so my eyes are moving around, so I'm also talking to myself too. But eye contact is something that, especially as a woman and as a conservative, you need to hone in on because it makes you look a lot more confident. So sometimes I play a game with myself when it's either I'm at a staff meeting or if I'm speaking to a group of policy professionals, or yesterday I was working with a senator in the United States Senate, helping him get ready for a TV interview. I'm making sure that I can at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I try to count how many seconds I can look at him in the eye, because eye contact is something I've noticed is so hard to get in young people these days. So make sure you use eye contact. Even if you're not interested, I can guarantee you I'm uninterested in a lot of things that I hear from people these days. But looking at them in the eye is something really, really helpful. All right. I like to tell people, actually, I was talking to somebody today who was conducting her very first interview. A girl in our office, she is a staff assistant, and she was sitting down with a candidate to take her job in our office. And she came to me and she was like, hey, I'm interviewing somebody today. I've never interviewed them before. What do I do? And I said, use your hand gestures and sound and look confident, because that girl is probably just as scared as you are. And guess what? Like, you are going to be the person that is interviewing her and look and sound confident if you take up more space. So when you're communicating, use your hand gestures. Don't be robotic, but feel free to take up some room. That will help you that will make you look confident and sound confident, not just on TV, but when you're talking to your boss in the office. All right, the last thing, and this is something that I work on quite a lot and very intently with a lot of members of Congress when they go on TV. But the same rule of thumb applies for you if you're going to talk at a staff meeting or if you are going to speak to your professor. It is amazing how much you can trick people into thinking that you are really on their side when you smile. So I do a lot of hostile interviews on radio. So I do a lot of NPR interviews on radio, and I do them on cultural issues like critical race theory, porn in schools, all stuff that you have to just pinch yourself that you're talking about these days. But I do NPR interviews on how I think that we should be getting porn out of schools. And I also do NPR interviews on how I was very proud to work for President Trump, and I think he's a great guy. That's also, it's like getting electrocuted every day when you say that to NPR. But all that to say, when you smile, you can get away with saying a lot more because people think that you are relating to them, and you are. So smiling really helps. You can be confrontational, and you can be pushing back, and you can be fighting the left. But if you smile, it just somehow makes your point even more strong. Let me go ahead and just show you. I won't play the video because I don't think we'll get any audio, but let me go ahead and just show you
a United States, Dame
clip.
Karen
I don't
Pierce.
know.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, here we go. Okay, so freeze frame here. Do you see this lady on the right? Her name is Dame Karen Pierce. I don't know her. I'm sure she's a lovely human, but I do see her on Fox quite often. And every single time she goes on Fox, she looks like this, okay? She doesn't look friendly. It's just the RBF makes her look really, really angry. And so I think one thing that you all need to be consciously aware of and be practicing in your day-to-day life, I try to do it as well, is get rid of the RBF just from like moment by moment. One of the things you guys have probably seen while you've been an intern here on Capitol Hill, especially when Congress is in session, is when you walk out of a hearing, or if your boss is in the news and you're walking behind him in an interview, you will possibly be in some B-roll. You might be in some shots. I learned this the hard way when my second job on Capitol Hill. I was working for Mike Pence, who was a congressman at the time from my home state of Indiana. And by the way, how many Hoosiers do we have here? All right, we got a couple. Chris, you're one too? The AV guy is a Hoosier. Although I will say I'm a Hoosier by birth, Boilermaker by the grace of God. I went to Purdue, so I would not call myself a Hoosier. But I was walking out Pence. I don't know what we were doing. We were like, we just finished an Obamacare vote. This is like the age of the Tea Party, 2008, 2009. And the big vote to pass Obamacare was on a Sunday night. And I was working for Pence at the time, putting him on TV and putting all House Republicans on TV. And he was walking out of the House floor right after the vote. It was like 10 p.m. on a Sunday night. And I was right behind him. And it was one of my very first big moral votes that I had worked on as an official Capitol Hill staffer. I was young, I was green, but I so strongly believed that Obamacare was the worst thing that could ever happen to our country. LOL, isn't that funny? I thought Obamacare was, come to find out, we have porn in schools. But I was so upset at the time that I had just started tearing up. I was so emotionally invested in this vote. So I'd gone to the bathroom, teared up a little bit, and then I was walking behind him, and I looked terrible. I was just like this. But it was a very prominent Getty photo, and of course Getty photo is like the syndication for all photos of every newspaper ever in America. And so that photo was just like plastered everywhere, and so you just see me like in the background like this. And so that photo was then used at my high school reunion when I showed up. Everyone was like, what's Rachel up to? Here's what she's up to. So I learned very quickly, it's not just a TV interview, it's walking around on Capitol Hill where there's cameras everywhere, that just that slight smile, getting rid of that RBF will go a long way. All right? Okay, so we'll stop there and we'll talk about content. Now, I don't need to tell you all that in the age of really quick one-liners and 10-second Instagram or TikTok videos, the quick punchy lines are the ones that usually get the headlines. How many were here was it last summer when the Dobbs decision came down? How many were here in Washington? Okay. How many went to the Supreme Court and were on the street where they had to put barricades between the pro-life side and the pro-choice side? Okay. A handful of you. I don't know if you guys remember, but if you were to have walked down that street right after the Dobbs decision, it would have been a master class in what are the 10 like idiot guides phrases that the left uses and how do they just on repeat. They're like 2, 4, 6, 8, we want to kill your babies, or whatever those lines were that they would shout. They are so good when they're protesting and having these quick, like powerful, just stupid things, and everyone thinks, oh, that's so novel. Let's interview them and put them on CNN. And you guys I'm living in a world where you don't need a lot of depth when it comes to how you message. And I think that's the number one. If I'm telling somebody who wants to go into communications and wants to not only articulate their own beliefs, but work on Capitol Hill someday where you have to articulate your boss's beliefs or articulate our side, the conservative movement's beliefs, you really have to have a little bit more than just a headline. Now, I will be honest, I fall prey to this too, where I have a short attention span and I will just read headlines and formulate my opinions on that. So I'm preaching to myself here too. But if you guys are just getting your news on Twitter and you're just getting your news on headlines, you are doing what everybody else here in DC is and what the left is, and you're not going to be able to full-throated articulate your position. So one free piece of advice before I get into how to really message and put your content together is, guys, read long-form pieces. I don't like to read long-form pieces. I like to listen to podcasts. So I have to force myself, maybe once or twice a week, I'll see an article come through and I'll bookmark it. And I force myself, like on Saturday mornings, just to, okay, I have 30 minutes. I'm going to read these 3 pieces. Okay, what is the American Conservative writing about? What is the Federalist writing about? I'm the comms director for my boss, and I don't read all of his pieces. So on Saturday, I'm going to be reading his World op-ed about why Senator Tuberville's hold on the noms is a great idea. So what are some pieces that you see circulating around that you don't have time to read, and read them all on Saturday? And it could just be on a couple issues. Maybe you guys are interested in the issue of life. Okay, not the same old talking points, but what's actually happening right now in life? Well, Senator Tuberville, anybody here interning for Senator Tuberville? Coach Tuberville is doing something very, very brave. In fact, many of his Republican senators are telling him he's bad for doing this. He, since February, has been blocking the nominations of everybody at the DOD due to be promoted until the DOD, for the first time ever, when they were saying, hey, we want to pay for everyone's abortion, he says, no, we're going to take that policy out. And I'm pro-life. I don't think the Pentagon should be killing babies. I think they should be, killing our enemies and cutting their heads off. And that's what we're going to do here. And he's been holding up their noms. That's fantastic. But how does he do that? What does that mean? Does that mean that he needs to have a certain amount of votes? Those are the kind of things you guys need to be reading about. You don't need to just be listening to the top lines. You need to be digging in a little bit deeper. So with that said, let me see. Oh, this is going to be another issue. Chris, are we just consigned to no audio for the rest of the presentation? If so, that's fine. All right. So what I'm showing you now is an old Will Witt video, and I know you guys have probably seen some of these, but the reason why I'm showing you this is because he asks some sort of diversity question to this kid that goes to Berkeley, and almost every single other kid who's asked, hey, what's your viewpoint on X, or do you think diversity or free speech is a good thing or a bad thing? No, it's a terrible thing because X, and then he asks why, and immediately crickets. So that's just my point. Nobody here in the city on the left can articulate really what they think. If they do, then they have to live with the cognitive dissonance of that. So how about you? How do you prep for speaking to a man on the street interview, or going back next semester if you're still in school and articulating to your college professor who asks you to write a paper on women in sports and you use the word biological man and you get an F, like one of my friends, Olivia Krolchek at the University of Cincinnati just did, and got an F for it? How do you articulate what you want to say in a way that is the most persuasive? Okay, I'm going to give you 3 things to do. The first thing is, you should always be thinking when you're writing and when you're talking, how do I not just tell somebody, but how do I show them? How do I give examples about what I mean? And that doesn't need to be a full story. It can just be something, it could be a hypothetical example. So in my day-to-day life, we work on cultural issues at the Center for Renewing America, and one of the things that we're making a big priority right now is pornography in schools. And so one thing, and I know you guys have seen a lot of people do this, is not just say, we have pornography in schools, or we have really terrible stuff in schools we want to take away from the kids, the left immediately says, well, you just want to burn books and ban them. Well, no, the best way to give an example is, and you're seeing these parents going to school board meetings with graphic pictures. And normally I wouldn't endorse that, but I think we have to. We have to be reading verbatim. This is what my third grader brought home the other day, and read it verbatim. The best way to visualize and to get your point across, is to visualize and give example. So when you guys are going back home and you're telling your professor, you're telling somebody at school, we have no free speech here on campus. Don't tell me that. Show me. Who got kicked off? Did Riley Gaines get, thrown into a school room where she couldn't get out? That type of thing. That's what I'm looking for, okay? The second thing is, how do you use comparisons? Now, this can be a little tricky to explain, so let me give you an example. So another big fight going on here on Capitol Hill right now, maybe you guys are keeping up with this, and this is just like I was saying about Senator Tuberville. Mike Lee's been joining in on this. The Senate and the House just passed an NDA reauthorization. The Senate is going to be doing so. We were very active in working with the House to make sure we got some really good amendments in there. Bob Good was a champion for a lot of them. How do you get all the state-sanctioned racism out of the Pentagon? How do you say, hey, Pentagon, you should be fighting our biggest threat, which is China, and not putting in a DEI office? And so one of those things obviously is abortion, which is why Senator Tuberville is holding up the nominees. And Mike Lee uses this amazing comparison. He did this a couple days ago, July 16th. And since then I've seen it take off, and this is a perfect example. If you are a member of the United States military and your grandmother dies, you have to use your time off, take 5 days off, 6 days off of your vacation to go home, okay? If you want to get an abortion, you don't take any days off. In fact, it's incentivized for you to. So how is that fair, and what type of culture are we promoting within the Pentagon if that's the case? So do you see how he uses that as a comparison? So instead of saying, it's bad the Pentagon is doing abortions, he's saying, look how unfair this is. Stealing a word the left likes to use. Look how unfair this is. That's what I mean by comparison. So maybe for you, it's something like, hey, I'm fighting the abortion pill on my campus. It shouldn't be handed out for college students for free. And guess what? That's not much of a novel idea. X university over here just did the same thing. And look, their test scores are rising, or something like that. So look and find who else is doing something that you want to do that's reasonable, or look and see how you can make a comparison to show how crazy it is for something you're fighting against. All right. We're in Washington, so I feel like I have to use the word numbers, or explain why numbers are a good thing, but there also could be a bad thing. If you're talking about numbers in really big terms, I was working with a member of Congress on Monday from Iowa. I won't say his name. He's a very sweet man, but he starts almost all of his interviews when talking about spending, starting off his interviews something like this. Well, if you look at the GDP right now, the interest on the debt from 1994 is 124%. And nobody knows, nobody cares, and they've all flipped the channel and they're watching something else. So if you're using numbers, use them and bring them down for the lowest common denominator. So instead of talking about how much GDP over the debt is, arguably, I told him, and I would tell you, you should be talking about what we're spending on, not how much we're spending. We should be talking about how we're funding teachers to teach state-sanctioned racism. Talk about that. But if you do have to use numbers, make sure that the smallest number that you use is one that people understand. So for example, one talking point that he and I worked on after we were working together on Monday was, when instead of talking about how much money we're spending over in Ukraine, most people don't understand billions of dollars. It goes over their head. Say, we have sent more money to Ukraine than the entire budget of Missouri or Iowa, wherever state he's from. I'm from a flyover state. That was not meant as a slight. I legitimately just forgot where he's from. We are spending as much money in Ukraine as we are the entire budget of Iowa for the next 2 years. That to me makes a lot more sense, okay? So using numbers in an easy way is something that you always need to be thinking about when you're communicating. And last but not least, how can you insert yourself in the story in a way where people can't argue about your experience? Here's what I mean by that. So I was working 2 weeks ago with a group of detransers, people that have gone through sex surgeries and have come out the other side way sicker, really depressed, and to be quite honest, very upset that they actually were led into a sex change when they didn't, in their young minds, probably didn't want that. And so one of the things I was telling them and we were working on together is, don't just tell me that sex transition surgeries or gender mutilation for minors is a bad thing. Tell me about your experience. Tell me about how you've had 2 heart attacks and a triple bypass surgery at the age of 32. over the trans surgery that you had 2 years ago. Tell me about how your doctor told you last week that you'll probably not live to see your grandkids because you had a bottom surgery. Or show them your arm where you can't even wear short sleeves because they took the skin off of your arm. These are serious times, and these are very graphic examples I'm giving you. But the point is, people can argue about your opinion. And to be quite honest, if you're communicating to somebody and you're in college or right out of college or as a young professional in Washington, you're probably not being brought in to be a policy expert. You're probably brought in to talk about how you and your experience have an opinion or a viewpoint on X. So if your big fight on campus is you want to have concealed carry on campus, don't say we need guns, we need to protect the Second Amendment. No, say how you as a young woman walking late at night from your library to your dorm don't feel safe and you deserve to protect yourself. Use phrases like that. So anyway, you can put yourself in the story. People are going to be it's going to be much harder for them to argue with you if you tell them your story. All right, we'll keep on going. We'll go to, Riley Gaines does a really great job of this. She always talks about how you weren't in that locker room. You didn't see what I saw. I saw the podium handed from this person to that person. Her interviews are great examples of how she doesn't tell, but she shows.
To have fairness and equality. I want them to be able to play sport, but not at the expense of women's rights.
Exactly. The first sentence you said, I believe it was, Leah Thomas quoted saying, it breaks my heart to see trans kids lose out on opportunities. You're exactly right. Replace that with the word woman. Does it still break Thomas's heart to see women lose out on opportunities? Because that's exactly what's happening. From my experience competing against Leah Thomas at the national championships, I watched firsthand women lose out on opportunities. I watched women not become All-Americans, missing that 8th and 16th place by one place because they were displaced by a male. This, of course, goes against everything that Title IX was created to protect. And now we have the Biden administration, the people in the White House who are actively working to rewrite Title IX.
All right. Let's quickly go into one more thing on communications before I then talk about jobs in communications. And that is what a lot of people here, and to be quite honest, a lot of people across the street, Republicans in particular, are scared of, and that is hostile questions. How do you go up and talk about how critical race theory shouldn't be in schools or porn shouldn't be in our libraries and not get nervous about getting beat over the head and being called a bigot or a racist? How do you do that? Well, that's what I spend my days working on. And let me just give you a couple quick tips for how not to and how to answer questions that get thrown at you or communicate in a hostile scenario, okay? So the first thing is, don't ever repeat the negative accusation or the comment that they throw at you, okay? So last night, my boss, who was a former Trump cabinet official and is now the president of our organization, Center for a New America, went on NPR. He and I both did NPR, but his interview was after mine. And he went on to talk about how a big push we're making for the center, that the president should come back, and any Republican president that comes back in the next administration should have full authority over the administrative state. They should have no deep state G6 level interns over there pulling your security clearance because they don't like Trump. So that's what we're working on. So the NPR interviewer asks my boss last night, don't you need to save Trump for himself? Okay, from himself. That was the question. And I knew this was probably going to be a question, so I was murder boarding him. I was mock interviewing him before he went on. And I told him, do not say, no, the president doesn't need to be saved from himself, because that will be the one soundbite that they pull, because this is a taped interview. And you never want to sound offensive, because you always sound like you're guilty of saying what you're not. But not only that, you want to go on the offense. Any sort of accusation or attack people throw at you in the city is total gaslighting, because they're doing the exact same thing that they accuse us of. And that's just one thing. So you have to walk in saying, this is a game of chicken. I'm right morally, and you're going to be paying for it. So here's how I answer your question. So never repeat the accusation. Here's how you answer a question like that. And this is how he answered it. Absolutely not. The president is in charge of the administration of the White House. Nobody is asking President Biden if he should be saved from himself. And then he went on to answer it. So that's the positive go on offense answer that I want you guys to think about giving when you're asked a hostile question. All right. The other thing too, and I'll go through this quickly because I want to have time for questions, is flip the argument on its head. Like I said, don't repeat the negative, shut it down and say that you are defending the person that they say you're not. So go on offense. Let me give you an example like this. So I do a lot of work on border security, and one of the things that I get asked when I'm doing interviews is, aren't you essentially racially profiling people when they come across the border? And the answer is absolutely not. In fact, what we're trying to do is make sure every single person that comes across the border is safe. Right now, they're not safe. And then I give them metrics on rape and trafficking. It's at its highest level, and just go off and on and on. So I shut it down, and then I go in my answer to prove that I'm the one that's trying to help people cross the border, not them. They're completely fine to watch these children be trafficked, and that's sick. So I kind of lean into that fact. I think right now, as a culture, we're on the side of like moral. We're not arguing about tax reform anymore. This isn't like, I'm right, you may be wrong, our numbers don't add up. No, this is like, these people are trying to destroy our country, and we need to go in and on the moral high ground and reflect that in our answers. All right. Last but not least, make sure that you also show empathy. Like I said, you are the one trying to help. All right? Now let's keep going to switch to this last section I want to talk to you guys about. And this may be something that, to be honest, you're the most interested in. You guys have lived here for a couple months now. Maybe this is your second summer out here, third summer, and you want to know what communications looks like. I will tell you, as somebody who came out as a staff assistant on Capitol Hill, not really doing a comms job, I was the most interested in comms, and so I started asking to help in comms, and that's ultimately how I worked my way up. But I've worked on comms in the White House and on Capitol Hill and in campaigns and in media companies, and I can tell you that no two jobs look the same, but the one thing that is consistent through all of them is that there's a couple personality qualities and work habits that I look for when I'm hiring, and I know people promoted me because I did when I was an intern and when I was starting off on the Hill. The first is hard work. So when I first started working for Mike Pence, he is not very good at names. He for the first 2 years of me working for him, couldn't remember my name. But that wasn't just me, he was almost everybody. Now, there's a lot of people on Capitol Hill are the same. They may recognize you by face, but they don't recognize you by name. So when I first interned for Pence, I showed up early every morning. I left late every night, and I would always do the jobs that I knew needed to be done that weren't on my internship portfolio. So as you guys know, every Capitol Hill office has what's unique to their district. So Georgia's got peanuts. I know some of you guys have different food, whatever. Indiana, we have popcorn. And so Pence always had a very big popcorn machine. I don't know, Young may have one too. And those things are foul. Like my dad's a popcorn farmer, and still to this day, I will not eat popcorn. I think it's disgusting because I've had to pop those popcorn machines and I had to clean them out. Well, one thing I would take upon myself when I was working for Pence is I would always make sure that I was the one that cleaned the popcorn machine, even if nobody asked me to. And so fast forward a year and a half when Pence was looking for a junior level press person, he asked if his staff would go hire the popcorn machine girl. And that's what he called me for the first 2 years of me working for him, was the popcorn machine girl. But the reason I say that is because if you work hard, they will notice. I notice people that work hard. It's not about what law degree you get, what degree you get in college. Is, are you willing to bust your butt? And that's one thing I would tell people. The other thing too is practice writing. Writing is so hard to hire for these days. It doesn't matter if you want to do digital communications, if you want to be a speech writer, or if you want to be somebody like me who likes to just yell at reporters all day. You have to be good at writing. And I'll be the first to admit I don't capitalize any of my words in my text messages, and I voice to text, so I've gotten a lot really lazy. But as I've been here long enough, I feel like I can get away with that. But for you and any of your communications, whether it be email or something as simple as texting your boss, writing is something that is very much bemoaned in our offices these days, as nobody's a good writer anymore. We can't hire anybody. I'm not a good writer. Now, you're not born a good writer. You have to practice. I used to write all the time in high school and in college, and then I fell out of, that's my time, we're to stop talking. I fell out of disuse, and I had to start practicing again. So while you're in your 7 years of famine, getting ready to go to DC, start practicing writing. All right, the other thing I would tell you is, if you know anything about technology, your bosses in DC will think you're an absolute savant, okay? The other day I had to tell my boss, probably for the 18th time, you can't start a tweet with a person's name. You have to put a period before, otherwise it's a direct message and not a tweet. I've said this probably 15. He's like, oh, thank you so much. Like, what would I do without you? Okay, this is not rocket science, but if you know how to do digital media, and I'm not talking about like the algorithms to like figuring out like all these things in AI. No, I'm talking about Twitter, LinkedIn, Rumble. If you know how to do that, you will be leaps and bounds above a lot of people in this city. All right. This is the last thing I will say before I give you a couple of do nots and take questions. always keep up with what's going on in the news. Not just read long form pieces, but if you know what's going on in the news, you file things away, you've got a good memory filed away, you will know exactly what you should be talking about, how you should be communicating, and how you formulate your viewpoints. So when you come to Washington, you're not like, wait, what's the conservative viewpoint on Puerto Rican statehood? You've read about it, you know about it, okay? This is one of my favorite. My mom is she does a lot of cross stitches, and so I have this cross stitched above my office. I also have William Tecumseh Sherman, the total like really legit Civil War general. I also have his quote cross-stitched above my desk, which is not at all godly or biblical, so I don't have it in the PowerPoint, but it's like, if I could kill every reporter before breakfast, I would, but then we'd be getting reports from hell before lunch, which I just think is the best quote ever. But I don't have this in here because I do not endorse that behavior. But this quote is something very, very good. You're not going to believe what the fake news says, but just know how they're reading about it, know how they see about it. I'm working right now on a couple hit pieces coming for some of my colleagues from the Post and the New York Times. I follow the reporters that I know are writing these pieces on Twitter. I know what they write about. I know the questions they're going to ask me. Read the news all the time. All right, let's just quickly finish up by a couple things of what not to do, and I'll just throw them all up here so we can start taking questions. I know DC is high turnover, and you won't stay in a job much longer than a year, maybe 2 years, but you would be shocked at how much you will impress your bosses if you just seem like you're happy to be there and you want to learn everything you can in that position. You're not like, ugh, I'm just a staff assistant, I want to be a press secretary. No, stay where you are, learn everything you can, soak it all up, be happy to be there. Don't be too good to clean out the popcorn machine. And don't expect to have your dream job the second you get out of college. It took years for me to kind of figure out what I wanted to do, and now I'm having my dream job. All right, I just put this in here because I had an intern last summer who thought he knew everything, so it's obviously a man. So I put number 3 in there. None of you guys do that, I'm sure. All right, always Google things, never ask questions. People here in the city are busy. Do not ask them questions that you can Google yourself. That's something I would always tell people. All right. With that said, I want to open this up for as much time we have for questions, because I know you guys are probably wondering where you go from here and what maybe you would like to know if you are looking for a job in communications or even just in DC in general. So fire away. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for coming. Oh, I'll take yes. I'll take closer. One on both sides, but sure. Thank you for coming to speak with us today. I wanted to ask about your family and how that plays a role in your professional career. What role do you serve as a wife and a mother? What are the most significant roles while you're balancing your professional career as well?
That's a very good question. Well, I'll tell you, as far as my husband goes, he is very supportive and I appreciate him. He does not do politics. I dated it for a very long time in DC, and I'm very strong and opinionated, and I'm a black or white thinker. And I realized that if I dated anybody, even if they were quote unquote a Republican, I probably just wouldn't agree with them. So many of my relationships ended up going south because of politics. But the Lord has blessed me with somebody who's not in politics, but is supportive and conservative. So I think that's helpful. I don't have any kids yet, although I was telling some people before this started, I have a hot pink couch that I just bought that I spent a lot of money on and I love, and I treat it as if it is a child. That is the only thing in my life that I would view as a dependent. But my family, my parents and my siblings, none of them were political. Everybody in my family is an engineer or a data scientist or a geneticist. And I was they didn't understand me. And the behaviors that my parents tried to beat out of me as a kid actually turned out to be very useful and make me good at my job when I'm dealing with reporters. So there's a weird sort of I never felt like I was completely understood when it came to what my family did. But I will tell you, now that I am married and now that I have seen how my parents have sort of adapted to what I do, it's that I have very strong viewpoints and I work with people who view the world very similar to me, but I go home to a family that doesn't. And during COVID, that drew a lot of, that made me at odds with a lot of people in my family. I worked at the White House every day. I didn't have work from home. I didn't want people to tell me to wear a mask on. I changed my name on the Starbucks app because then every time I'd go on, I was worried they'd spit in my drink because I didn't have a mask on. So I was very different than a lot of people in my family. And one thing I realized, and what I will say in conclusion to your question is, I love to fight the good fight and believe what I do, but at the end of the day, I think as a Christian, the Lord calls me to make peace and unity with my family at a time and in a world where it's very hard to come by. And so I guess my encouragement would be the crusader in your day job, but learn how to turn it off and love others, because I think sometimes the Lord really values peace at a time where it may not feel like we should have peace. And so I don't know if that answers your question at all, but it is complicated when you're in politics and nobody in your family is.
Hi. So as far as public speaking, what do you recommend maybe being here in DC? If there are any programs or any way to start practicing that now?
You mean as far as like boot camps or opportunities to do that? That's a good question. I don't know of I don't know, Toastmasters or any of those types of groups. I don't know. And maybe the team at Clare Boothe Luce has those. What I do know is that experience is probably how I learned and probably the best indicator. And so I know this sounds dumb, but when I would start talking in my staff meetings as a very junior staff, it was a big deal that I was allowed to talk. And I made sure that I was viewing it in my mind, not as like I turn my performance switch on and I start being eloquent, but I just would look people in the eye and I would move my hands when I was talking at staff meetings. When I'm on Zoom, I try to pretend like I'm standing in front of somebody and talking to them in a group. I think as far as classes, I know the Leadership Institute has a lot of public speaking classes. That may be a great place to start, but honestly, don't overlook the small little opportunities you have to talk, period, and whatever maybe it's just in class.
Hello, thank you for speaking with us today. There's a lot of comments on social media or the Twitter battles online. What are your thoughts about responding to those type of comments? How do you handle those? What would be your advice going forward with those?
You guys are growing up and becoming of professional age at a time when I didn't have to deal with a lot of this stuff. So I don't envy you in that, where you want to be on Twitter, you want to be involved in the fight, you want to be on all these social media platforms, and really to be successful, you have to have content. But one of the first things that your employers will do will go see what you've been saying. And opinions are so nuanced and so strong in DC that if you, as a 19-year-old, 20-year-old said something that you may not necessarily agree with when you're 22, or maybe your employer doesn't agree with, that may bypass you for somebody that is looking to do communications. I will say that I do think if you're looking to do comms as a comms spokesperson for someone, the bar is much higher for you. You are the spokesperson, you are the front, you are the face for a person or a thing or an entity, and thus your personality and your point of view should not exist publicly. And so one of the very first things that I encourage people to do is when I'm hiring them is if you've got a Twitter account, you're locking that down. Unless you're tweeting about true crime, which is one of my favorite things in the world, you're not talking about politics. You lock it down and you are speaking on the behalf of this organization, so you shouldn't have an opinion. You should not have a footprint. You should speak for us on our behalf. I think it is much more risky and honestly not worth it to be out there on platforms as you are figuring out your way through what profession you want. So in my role as a spokesperson, I have to be on Twitter and I have to be tweeting out things because the media is so unfair and they don't work with us in a way that maybe 10 years ago they did. So one of my colleagues is a man by the name of Jeff Clark. Maybe you've heard of him. He worked at the Department of Justice under President Trump. Just like President Trump, they're going after him. They've raided his house. They've taken away all of his phones. He's looking at, who knows, a lifetime of what they're trying to do with President Trump, throw him in jail. And I will work with Washington Post reporters. I will talk to New York Times reporters, and I will say, please use this statement on the record. And what that means is every single word I say must be with my name added into your story. That's just like journalism 101. They don't do that these days. In fact, they will find ways. One thing the Washington Post has recently done, sorry, you're getting me on a soapbox, is they don't want to talk to you. They'll reach out on LinkedIn. I don't use LinkedIn, but they'll reach out on something they know isn't actually directly getting a hold of you. So they say they can reach out to you so they can write their story without your comment. So I have to, as a comms professional, as the head spokesperson, go on Twitter, and I have to say what I want to say because I'm not allowed to even comment in some of the stories. That's a little bit different, but if you're starting out and you work for one boss on Capitol Hill, okay? Like say you work for Bob Good, who's the intern for Bob Good? One of my absolute favorite members of Congress. I tell him this every time I see him. I think he thinks I'm obsessed with him. If you are Bob Good and you work for Bob Good and you tweet out all this great stuff, but say one day you're like, I want to work for a squish. I want to work for somebody that's like a moderate. Well, you're probably going to have to take down all your tweets because Bob Good is awesome. He's super conservative. He's one of my absolute favorites. But a lot of people on Capitol Hill do not like Bob Good. So if you're just kind of just jumping around from office to office, you need to be very careful what POV, what point of view you have out there. So I'm always just very cautious on any profile, everything locked down except for Twitter, which I have to have as my spokesperson job. That's my point of view. Other people may disagree. They may be like, well, you know, I want to be on Fox someday. I'm going to start getting my opinions. I just think it's way too risky. Be better at your job. Be elevated in a professional setting because you're a good worker and you're a hard worker versus your opinion. I don't know. These are all my opinions. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thank you again for your speech. What would be your advice for responding to questions to which you don't have the answer, and what would you say to that?
So that's a good question. There's probably different ways that you are meaning to ask me this. When you say, hey, I'm in front of somebody and they're throwing questions at me and I don't know the answer and I don't want to look dumb. Well, let me tell you how I tell folks, especially members of Congress, to answer this. Now, this may be what you're asking and maybe it's not. But say, for example, you're asked a question like, all right, the Senate's considering a bunch of these nominations. What do you think is going to happen? Maybe it's like a prognosticating question that you don't know the answer to. You should always respond to these questions by what you think should happen. So say, for example, somebody asks you, what's your name?
Alexa.
Alexa, what's your opinion on a 15-week life ban? Okay? And you don't really know how you would respond to ban on abortion at 15 weeks. Maybe you say something along the lines of, well, let me tell you, whether it's 15 weeks, whether it's 20 weeks, or whether it's 1 week. In my opinion, I think that any baby that is taken is a baby that should not be taken. I think, and you just kind of talk about what your viewpoint is, and you can make it sound like you're answering the question by using phrases of, well, let me tell you what I do think. Okay, that's one of my absolute favorites. Let me tell you what I do think, okay? That makes it sound like I am answering. And now maybe it's just a black or white, like, hey, do you know how many congressional districts are in the state of Indiana? I don't, but I can tell you that there are quite a few Republicans in Indiana who probably need to be talking to their voters a little bit more, something like that. That's how I would say. I'm a very jaded Indiana conservative. That's how I would answer that question. So phrases like that. Now, if you're talking to like a friend or a professor, don't like just lie or make up something. But if you're on the spot and you want to be communicating well, it's always tell me what filibuster. Tell me what you want to talk about. Tell me what you do think should be happening. That's the best rule of thumb.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question.
What would you say are some good communicators that we can look to emulate either on TV or clips online, just someone we can kind of look to like for, I guess, inspiration?
This is a very good question. She asked who would I recommend as a good communicator, but I also hate this question because I feel like if I give you an example, you're going to think that I like agree with them all the time. And again, you're talking to somebody who's a black or white thinker, either like it or don't. So let me just give you a couple names of people that I do think communicate very well. Now, I think Carrie Lake is a phenomenal communicator. Now, she is somebody who has done it for the last 20 years, right? So she has a leg up on people. She is somebody who always, if you look at some of the stakeouts that she did when she was running for governor, when they were asking her like the most insane questions, she turns it on its head and just pounds them over the head with it. It's awesome. She's a very, very good communicator. I think Chip Roy is a phenomenal communicator. He has a very fire and brimstone style, but that guy will always make you feel every single time you talk to him, and there's a reason why he goes on TV all the time, because he's really, really, really good. So those are two examples. I do think that, trying to think, Elizabeth Warren is an absolute communist and destroying our country, but she can spit out a couple thoughts that actually do sound smart for her. But other than that, you know, I'm like harsh on people, so I don't know. But I've played a couple clips of Riley Gaines. I think Riley's phenomenal. I think she's very good at the showing, the empathy. The left is all about feelings and what's fair, and you have to play that exact game, and that's what Riley Gaines is very, very good at. All right, guys, I know I need to wrap up. I put my email here on the screen. You can also send...
We have time for just a handful more.
Oh, okay, great, perfect. Awesome. We can take more questions if we do have any. If not, yeah, in the back.
There was an interview, I think, that CNN posted probably like at the beginning of the year, they like asked Ken Buck a question and then he responded, but they didn't post the full thing online. So it made it look like he said something that he wasn't saying. So how do you like respond if, I guess what I'm asking is like, how do you be concise so that they don't do that?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and that is something that I actually coach a lot of folks to do, because when you are sitting down with an interviewer, somebody that is going to be doing a taped interview, you're completely at their mercy, and they'll just keep you talking until you say something dumb or just spit something out because you're frustrated, and then they'll put that on the headline and run it over and over and over. So what I tell people to do is, if you're talking to a reporter or if you're talking to a broadcast interview, something that will be on TV later, and you know that it won't be in its totality, I tell people always record it yourself. So every state has different rules. DC is a one-party state, which means when you're talking to a reporter, you don't have to tell them that you're recording, and they don't tell you that they're recording you. So you always, when I'm talking to a reporter, I always have my own recorder. I have my voice notes. I record everything, okay? Because it'll always come back and bite you. So I always do that and then would post the interview later. But one thing I tell people, and this may be a little, I don't want to bore you with the details here, but I say, nobody will ever hear that full interview except for you and the reporter. So don't give them what they want. Just like repeat the same stuff over and over. So I gave a taped interview actually for Good Morning America. This was like a couple years ago when the women's marches were a thing, you know, like the pink hats. And isn't it evil how they just try to co-opt everything good from us, like the rainbow and pink and all that stuff? So I did an interview because I wrote this piece about how the Women's March doesn't represent me as a woman. And it was me and this girl who, from Good Morning America, was interviewing me, and it was taped. And she kept asking me these crazy questions. I knew exactly what she was trying to do. And so I just sat there and I said something like, as a woman, I believe that I should, and I just like said my thing over and over. I did an interview recently where the one phrase I wanted to get out there was, with Republicans like these, who needs Democrats? Now that may be an unpopular opinion, but some of these Republicans, I tell you, man. So I just said that over and over, and at some point they just give up, right? But they are on deadline. You're sitting there. They have to pull something that you're saying, and it's only awkward if you think it's awkward because it's just the two of you. So say whatever you want to say. And of course, sure enough, I won. They put my little "with Republicans like these, who needs Democrats" clip in the news package at 5:00, and this was in Arizona last 2 weeks ago. And so that's what I tell people to do. Like, if you're Ken Buck and you know that you're going on with CNN, first of all, I usually don't do like broadcasts with CNN anymore. I just think it's a waste of time. It's like throwing your pearls before swine. They don't deserve you. But if you do, just repeat over and over. What are they going to do? So, especially if it's taped. You can't do that on live interviews. You would look dumb.
All
yeah,
right,
go ahead.
One more question.
One more question. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Lauren, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for coming out to
Yeah,
us.
of course.
How do you stay strong mentally when you know that you're going to be thrown into an environment with people who are very divisive against what you believe, and how do you present what you believe without, like, I guess, falling down under the pressure?
That's a really good question, and it's something that I've been grappling with over the span of the years I've been here. Again, this is the reason why I do. One of my very favorite, as a Christian, one of my very favorite Bible verses is, be as innocent as a dove and as wise as a serpent. But the verse right before that says, I am sending you out as sheep amongst wolves. And I can't tell you if there's a better description for Washington, D.C. than a bunch of wolves. And so I think for me, what keeps me grounded, what keeps me from not just going out and literally punching everybody I see in the streets, because that's how I feel, is how do I know what the Lord is calling me to do? How do I know what's right? How do I know what I should believe and how I stand up for it? But then how do I accept that things are not going to be changing overnight, that things may never change, and still have the energy and the excitement to wake up every day and fight for something that I have not seen any progress on in a very long time? And to be honest, if Jesus comes back in 2 weeks, which is what I think is happening, is why I'm growing a garden, then how do I prepare for that and still wake up and fight every day in a political world when I've not taken any? And I'll tell you, I worked for President Trump. I was very proud to. I worked on Stop the Steal. I was in Pennsylvania right after the election for 2 weeks, sitting in front of the Philadelphia Convention Center at night, seeing people every night walking in with backpacks of ballots, completely helpless to do anything about it. And it may sound kind of silly, but it was almost like a spiritual experience where I'm just sitting there and I'm like, I can't I can't do anything right now. I'm here to fight the good fight. I'm here to work in politics. I'm here to work on life. I'm here to work on marriage. I'm here to get kids indoctrination out of schools, and nothing's changing. And so I think for me, we're all called to do something. And I know this is probably a little a belabored point. I think it was John Adams that said the only thing for good to prevail is for the only for bad to prevail is for good men to do nothing. And that is something also too, that it's like, listen, you can get beat down every day. There's so few people that are willing to give up their lives, move to a miserable city with a bunch of mosquitoes, where the cost of living is too high, where the chances of you getting murdered when you come out of the metro are not slim, and still be willing to fight every day. And I think for me, I love this country so much. My senior pictures in high school, everyone like does like the brick against the wall thing, or like holds the soccer ball. I asked my mom to drive me out to Washington DC and stand in front of the Lincoln Memorial. Like, that's how much I love our country. And I think for all of you all, you believe in something so strongly that you're here to fight for it. And when you don't see the results, that's ultimately something that you have to realize, okay, that's not me, that's God. Only God can be that. And this will be the last thing I say, because I know this probably sounds preachy, but there was one verse that I was actually, back in the day when I was working for Mike Pence, he would do devotions with us. And one thing that he gave me on a piece of paper that I still have was, it's in Isaiah, and it says, God is our judge, God is our lawgiver, and he is our king. And when Pence he said this to me, he's like, those are all three branches of government. You've got the judicial, you've got the law, you've got the king, and you've got the, whatever the other one is, lawgiver, king, judge. If you realize the Lord's in control of the Supreme Court, if you realize the Lord's in control of Capitol Hill, the Lord's in control of what happens in your life and what happens in Washington, it makes it a lot more, gives you cognitive dissonance to wake up and be like, well, I could be making a lot more money as a pharmacist right now, but I get to go to work every day and, talk about how terrible Bill Gates is. That's exciting. I get paid to do this. So that's kind of a long-winded way of saying that's how I cope. I also garden. That's my other coping mechanism. Did I go over, or should we take more questions? We're good? All right. Well, thank you guys so much. Here's my email if you need to reach out to me. But appreciate you guys all being here, and hopefully we'll see you guys sometime in the fall.